have no special talents. I am only passionately curious. Albert Einstein. It's time for science, and it's time to talk about the importance of activating prior knowledge and a multimodal approach to science education through establishing noticing, wondering, and connections routines. Our guest is Dr. Joel Donna, a professor of teacher education at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls, where he prepares future elementary through high school teachers to teach science by engaging students in doing science. We talk about how teachers coming into elementary science can leverage their own prior knowledge, and then how to model that with students. Dr. Donna describes the silent count, waiting and giving students time to think, which positions the teacher as co-learner. And we discuss some ways to approach AI with both pre-service teachers and students, and how it can fit into education, its drawbacks, and how the need for human interaction and interpretation will always be the most important aspect of education. If you want to read more about our guests and the topics we cover, check out the new and improved blog found on foss-science.com. See the show notes for a direct link. And as always, please send any comments, questions, or ideas for future podcasts to itstimeforscience@schoolspecialty.com. It's time for science, and it is time to talk to Professor Joel Donna. Joel is a professor of science education at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls. He began his career as a high school science teacher, received his Ph.D. in science education from the University of Minnesota. Joel served as a STEM specialist for the Minnesota Department of Education, where he developed a collaborative vision for STEM education in Minnesota and oversaw the federal math science partnership grants that provided professional development to over 600 teachers annually. He consults with schools on science, STEM, and engineering education, and has served on boards and committees focused on improving science education in Minnesota and Wisconsin. His research explores how curriculum materials can be designed to support teacher learning, which is right up our alley. So we're going to dive into the importance of tapping into students' prior knowledge and experience, how to implement high-quality instructional materials, and what skills kids will need in a world full of AI, and the importance of seeing themselves in science. So, Professor Donna, welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
I would love to start off with talking about prior knowledge and how important that is, because that comes up a lot in the podcast. So I'd like you to weigh in on the importance of tapping into kids' prior knowledge when they get to the classroom.
Yeah, it is absolutely fundamental. It's not only the prior knowledge, it is the life experiences that they have, right? And so we think about the ways in which all children are just bringing in predominantly, this experience of just being in the world and just noticing things and wondering about things from infancy, and some of the prior knowledge that comes from previous, grade levels or from informal sources, such as museums and educational TV, and all those things are kind of rattling around in their brains. And we think about these really engaging phenomena that high quality instructional materials have that are launching these kids into these kind of investigations. And really what they're doing in that space is really kind of activating both that prior knowledge and those life experiences in really interesting ways. And those brains are making connections and saying, hey, have I seen this before? Does this make sense? This is weird. What's happening here? Can I explain this yet? And so those kinds of those experiences that they have are really kind of shaping how they see that phenomena, and hopefully setting up such a way that it's just like, man, this is kind of puzzling. I'm not sure we can make sense of this thing yet. And what can we do together collectively as a science community to kind of make sense of it? And so really that level of engagement and relevance comes from the life experiences and prior knowledge that students have. And particularly, it's maybe, you look at the phenomena of like maybe, some phenomena are maybe more immediately relevant than others. But just little bits of moves from teachers, such as like, hey, what is this making you think of? What does this connect to? That is really where you see the engagement take off, right? Because when you're, looking at, I don't know, say, I'm trying to think of an example of phenomena. Oh, let's just take, the the solar lights, that might not be powering on, right, is an example of a phenomena you see show up in the FOSS curriculum. It's like, well, maybe I don't have solar lights on, that are powering on my own home, but maybe I've seen other kind of things electrical break, right? And I can really leverage that, or some kind of maybe toy I've seen that didn't work, wasn't working anymore. I can really leverage that experience. And you can just see the level of excitement on children's faces, right? When they're kind of like starting to make those connections in the brain. You say like things that wire together, fire together with those neurons, right? And that really becomes, for me, like that really kind of important first step in kind of really engaging students in making sense of the science.
Well, obviously, with somebody with so many years of teacher supporting teachers and pre-service teachers implementing high quality instructional materials, how do you do that? How do you get started with teachers just coming into the industry? What is it that you guys do to support them?
Yeah, I think that's really kind of the key, right? Because I think a lot of times that the students that that are coming into becoming elementary teachers, don't necessarily believe that they have a strong background in science, right? They don't necessarily believe that they're able to do science or able to teach science, right? And I think once we are able to not only engage them as adult learners and looking at something that's kind of puzzling and seeing the power of like really leveraging their own prior knowledge and life experiences, and more particularly, not only doing that, leveraging the community's life experiences, right, and prior knowledge to make sense of this thing. And really kind of seeing like, hey, we can do this. We can make sense of this together. Like we can come together as a community and do this work, and they can see that and make those connections and kind of have, I wouldn't call it a perfect resolution, right? Because nothing in science is ever perfect, right? That's not the goal of science. But like being able to see kind of like, oh man, we've done pretty good job of making sense of this ourselves. And then starting to go ahead and turning like, well, can we do this with kids? Right? And what is our role as teachers in that space after we kind of had that experience? And what's the role of high quality instructional materials in that? And so after we've done that, we can start to take a look at like, all right, well, how did we set this up? Like, what was so engaging about that phenomena? And it's like this idea of like we do some noticing, we do some wondering, and we make some connections. Like it's a type of routine that comes out of mathematics education that's really intentional, about really slowing down and making some space, to really just like, hey, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What might I be feeling? I wonder why. I wonder what if. I wonder how. And what does this make me think of or connect to, right? And so one of the things that we do with our students is we really have them rehearse these types of routines that you will see in curriculum, or things that they could bring in, relevant phenomena or engaging phenomena, and do that with each other, then do that with children. And so what does that look like? Well, for a couple of reasons, that, if we think about what the broader goals that we're trying to do is like, why are we trying to engage students' prior knowledge and life experiences? And for me personally, I think there's a lot of different reasons why we teach science, right? But for me personally, there's a beauty and power and wonder in the world, right? And that really comes from, those connections that you can make. And once you have just a beauty or, an appreciation of just like the patterns within nature, we can start to understand these things, as ourselves, but more importantly, again, as a community. And so what this routine starts to do is starts to kind of just drag out all of these prior knowledge and life experiences, right? Because noticings and wonderings just don't come out of nowhere, right? They really come out of our lived experiences. And when we're doing this type of routine, a couple things become really important. One is that we have this goal where we're going to make sense of the science together. And so to do that, we really have to be intentional about making space for everybody to have time to think and time to speak. And so there's the like little types of instructional routines that we can start to embed in there that our future teachers can really start to lift up very quickly. Things such as like the silent count. And what a silent count is basically, through the beauty of podcasts, not the most efficient way to do this, but you go ahead and you put a fist to your chest, right? A closed fist to your chest, kind of right below your chin, and this one indicates the silent zero. And you say to the students, give me a silent one. Hold up one finger when you have one thing you notice. And you pause and you wait. Show me two fingers when you have two things you notice. and you continue to really pause and wait. And what you see what you see is the children and the students and the adults starting to go ahead and starting to put up fingers. And what becomes really important in this as the person that's leading the science instruction is positioning themselves as a co-learner, being like, hey, there's something really weird going on here. How can we make sense of this thing together, right? And just really leveraging this idea that like, whoa, this is really weird. Like, what can we do to start to figure this thing out, right? Because you don't want to be coming across as like having knowing or the answers, or this just doesn't work, right? And kids play along, adults play along just magically with this sort of thing. So once they go ahead and start to go ahead and put up those fingers, and you wait for everybody to have a finger, right? Because this is such a we call a low floor task. Like there's no wrong answer. You can notice whatever you want, right? It doesn't matter. And so then you have the students turn and talk. They turn and talk with each other and take turns sharing with the things that they're noticing. And you say, all right, we're going to come together and in a bit here, and you're going to we're going to go around and you're going to start to share some things that your group talked about, kind of the classic turn and talk. And then what you do from there is, you listen into a couple of conversations. We work with our teachers in doing this, and you go ahead and you draw out, a particular group. Say like, hey, what did you and your group talk about? We don't try not to do the hands here. We want to just go ahead and just really kind of create this environment where, people are willing to go ahead and share because it's a low floor task, right? And we're making sense of this ourselves. And you start to kind of scribe these things out. What are we noticing? What are we wondering? What are we connection with? So we kind of follow this routine as we go. And we really kind of leverage these things, saying like, okay, well, we know some things about this, so we can start to go ahead and maybe draw a model that helps us understand that. But we've got a lot of really great questions, right, that we can go ahead and leverage to make sense of this, right? And then from there, that of course leads then into the curriculum materials from there, right? Then we'll talk about coherence. We can talk about the storyline that's being told, right? Within high quality instructional materials, but that's really where it starts. And with future teachers, once they start to see this, like, okay, for a couple of reasons. One, they really love this idea, particularly when they start to work with kids, that they can be a co-learner. They can really don't have to be the space of wisdom here. They can just really sit and wonder along with the kids, right? And just really take delight in what they're saying. Now, that's not saying we don't come in prepared for this work, right? Because we certainly do. We spend a lot of time thinking about anticipated responses, right? What might a child say here? What might they notice? What might they wonder? And most importantly, what might they connect with, right? What are the life connections they're going to be able to do? And you want to be really listening for those and really kind of draw into those sorts of things, right? But again, there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. We kind of think of it as a lesson that our students do is it's more of like a talk show, right? Where we're not looking for like, this is not a talking lesson. This is more of a listening lesson, right? And so what becomes important in that space is really that wait time, just giving that 3 seconds, that Mary Bud Rowe 3 seconds of wait time after students are done speaking, and let their brains continue to like process a little bit, because a lot of times let's take a little bit of time. They're like, well, wait, no, I'm not so sure about this. I'm thinking about this differently now, right? And that's where that metacognitive process, so we can talk a little bit about how these noticing, wondering, connections, routines kind of start to circle back, and so like how we can support students in making sense metacognitively through this work later on. But to me, that phenomena and really the noticing, wondering, connections routine is so powerful, not only for kids but for our future teachers, because they see the students' eyes light up and they see the joy in that space, and that's the magic of it.
Well, I also love that it's, traditionally, especially when I grew up, it was sort of science always felt like you'd sit down and you'd be lectured at. And that was it. It's just like, learn this. Oh, okay. And so immediately this is a better approach because, let's learn together. And I thought that when I was doing the research on this, just even the phrase noticing, wondering, and connections, that works on everything. I grew up as an artist. I mean, it works in art, it works in music, it works everywhere. That's a wonderful thing to be teaching kids.
For sure, right? And so our students, right, then after, they're about a year away from student teaching, they're undergraduate, predominantly, they go into social studies methods, right? And so then what they can do in that space is they can look at, some historical documents, right, or historical painting, right? George Washington crossing the Delaware or whatever, and say like, hey, what do you notice about this? What do you wonder about? What do you connect with in this space, right? And it becomes another launching point into, investigation of this, social phenomena, right? So it's a routine that again, it comes out of math education, works powerfully in science, right? High quality instructional materials oftentimes will embed these kind of materials, this kind of experience in them. Sometimes the connection piece needs to be embedded in, but that's kind of, again, the teacher's work, which I can talk about here in a second, what kind of the work of the teacher is in this space. But yeah, it is definitely art, like you say. I mean, all these spaces is such a powerful way to kind of see the world, right?
Yeah, it's a little easier in art because it's always about wonder. But I love that
Yeah,
art and science are together. I think that's wonderful. So let's talk a
yeah,
little bit more about the high quality instructional materials part. How teachers
yeah,
use them. Obviously, we're sponsored by FOSS. We're very proud of
yep,
our
yep,
materials. But in
yeah.
general, what is the role of high quality instructional materials for teachers, and how do they implement them?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly powerful, right? I've been on the curriculum development side of things. I spent some time with Open SciEd, right? And helping develop some of the middle school curriculum materials, a couple of units there. And so I've kind of seen the work that goes into that. And it's I don't know, is it, for every hour, it's maybe 60 hours of instructional development time, right? It's really a large lift, and it's incredible work. It's powerful work, and it's field tested and worked in classrooms, right, and like revised based on feedback, and it's oftentimes evaluated, right, through some of these different organizations that kind of evaluate these sorts of things, and so really I think it with the biggest shift in my own thinking since I started the work in teacher preparation, maybe, I, I've done teacher professional development work for a long time, but more of like the teacher education side of things. I've just really started to shift my thinking away from teachers designing instructional materials to really learning how to partner with them and really learning how to evaluate them. And that's been a tremendous shift in my thinking. And I think in a lot of ways it's in response to just like we know like how limited teachers' time are, right? Particularly the elementary level,
Right, right.
and thinking about just like the amount of prep time they truly have, right? And thinking about like these materials is not being teacher proof, but actually being taking a lot of skill, right, to implement well, and a lot of things that the teacher has to bring to the materials. And so, because we're in the upper Midwest and we have a lot of students that maybe have a rural background, maybe this is more of a universal truth. But we think about this idea of like, hey, I'm going to invite you over to Thanksgiving, and if I invite you to Thanksgiving, right, you would say, cool, yeah, I'd love to come. And then our rural background would say, not necessarily rural, I don't know, but again, this might be universal, right? But what would you say here, Tom? If I say, hey, you're come to Thanksgiving, you would say,
I would say that's great. Yeah, can I bring something?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. What can I bring, right? And so we think about like, what as a teacher you bring to the materials, right? Because the materials are not teacher proof, right? You can't just stand up there and read them, right? And just you have to really think about ways in which you don't want to, whole scale change them, but you have to like thinking about things like the curriculum materials will do some anticipated responses. You got to do more. And what you really got to do is you really got to embed those instructional routines, like the silent counts, right? It's the curriculum materials can't do that, right? Because they're serving a particular role to kind of help you understand where the story is going. You got to bring that. You got to bring those instructional routines. You have to bring a ton of talk moves. Like you have to be able to go around as students are doing the science investigations and say things like, "Hey, what are some things you're noticing? How is this helping us understand our focus question? What do you think about what so and so said about this? Do you agree or disagree with that? Why? what's the evidence we're gathering here? You have to be able to kind of like help students really lean into the sense making process while they're investigating, right? And then particularly within those sense making circles, where students are coming together and reviewing that data takes a tremendous amount of teacher expertise, right? And so really thinking about like, hey, how am I going to facilitate this? What are the questions that I'm really going to launch into? Am I going to put a silent thumb in there? Going to throw a turn and talk in there? Like, how am I going to model these sorts of things out? And so, the teachers have to kind of do that work. They have to bring the talk moves, have to bring the anticipated responses. They have to think about the coherence of the storyline, what the story is being told there. They have to make the curriculum does a job thinking a little bit about like how to connect these lessons. But it's really the teacher's jobs like, okay, we figured out A, B, and C today. What do you think we should do next? What do you think our next steps are? When we come back tomorrow or next week here, what do we got to do? So teachers play an incredible role in helping, make these kind of connections, make these things smoother so the story gets told. So we can go ahead and start to like really understand the trajectory of this phenomena. And so teachers are really kind of playing an important role in that. And I can certainly talk a little bit more about like how we then support our teachers in doing that. But I'll kind of pause that for a second and say like the second important thing that we can do in teacher preparation is help them learn how to evaluate curriculum materials, high quality instruction materials. Understanding like, wait a second, what makes something high quality, right? And then what if we look at different types of high quality instruction materials, like versus like jumping online, right? In jumping online and, you maybe asking an AI tool to generate, an instructional unit, right? Or asking, going to Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers, right? And just seeing like, okay, well, this is different. And so they have to, in terms of teacher preparation, they have to learn how to embed these sorts of things. They have to bring in, they have to learn how to evaluate it, and then they got to try it out. They have to try it out. They have to go ahead and rehearse these sorts of things with adults where we can take time outs, we can pause, we can rework stuff. We say like, okay, let's try this a little different way, kind of be coached in that space, and then be able to teach like a sequence of things. They can kind of see how these things fit together, and they have to spend some intentional time talking about the affordances from both a teacher perspective, but more importantly from a student perspective, about like what are the things we're liking about these different, these different packages that are out there, like how are they standing up across each other, right? Those are some of the things that we're really thinking deeply about. What are you going to bring to the party, right? How do we evaluate these sorts of things? And then I can talk a little about a third thing too, which is like, how are we going to continue to make space and advocate for science, right? As we look at some of these literacy, some of the science reading sorts of stuff, kind of really kind of focusing in. And I don't know if you've got probably podcasts about this.
It comes up all the time. The little amount of time that teachers have for science, and so that's one of the reasons that we love the materials. Is it helps them at least get to that point. Some of that's been done for you.
Yes. Yeah. And provide some flexible pathways within that as well. And so, I think that's important.
I want to talk a little bit about the importance of kids seeing themselves in science. One of the, you sent us some slides and stuff, and there was a great quote in there from Brian Brown from the book Science in the City about if we fail to recognize the diverse nature of language and cognition, students will bring a wealth of knowledge and communicate it in vernacular language will never be heard because of the nature of the classroom conversation. Privilege is only one type of communication. So it's really an idea of learning how to get kids involved, not necessarily using the language of traditional old school science, but to let them do it in their own vernacular. How important is that?
Yeah, it's so important, right? And I think that's really where, we circle back to the noticing, learning, connections routine, right? And like how important that routine becomes because again, these wonderings don't come out of nowhere. They come out of these kids' lived experiences, right? And they're able to express their wonderings, not in sciencey sorts of ways, right? But in just like their own ways. And so, science plays an important role in developing, some of these, provides experience for like in introducing scientific vocabulary, right? But only after students have tried to make sense of the phenomena themselves in their own words, in their own ways, based on data and evidence, of course. But really, then we can start to say like, well, hey, we've been describing it this way. You've used this word to describe it, but really, not really, but here's another way, right, that scientists talk about. We use the word, erosion, right? Or deposition or whatever it happens to be. You're saying like taking away, right? Well, we said that's erosion and dropping that off, we call that deposition, right? And we can see, where did we see that, right? And so this, again, seeing themselves in the science, again, starts of course with their language, starts with those lived experiences and that prior knowledge, right? But again, as it comes, circles all the way through, the power and the joy and the beauty and those aha moments, right? Which I think are just kind of slow burns. They're not the light bulb moments, right? They're really those slow burns through that metacognitive process where we started to say, like, hey, in the beginning, we started to make sense of this phenomenon. We thought this is what was going on. I brought my prior knowledge and life experiences to this. And as a teacher, again, embedding these talk moves, thinking like, hey, Tom, how is your thinking changing here? Is it changing, and how? And why is it changing, right? And really being intentional, like, these kind of like moves, like I used to think and now I know, but now I'm wondering, sorts of things. Those become important moves. So the other important move, again, to help them see this metacognitive process is really about like, what is this reminding you of, right? Not just in the beginning, but as they're doing the science and making some of the science, like, what is this now reminding us of? What are the connections are you making, right? And those, like, again, like you can just see the lift and the joy and the energy kind of come in that space. And why that space is because they're seeing themselves in the science, right? They're seeing themselves in the world. They're seeing themselves being able to make sense of it, right? In a way that I think is incredibly powerful. And I'll just say too that, again, this kind of co-learner arc that, again, we kind of really work with our teachers in kind of presenting themselves as kind of just really wandering alongside the students, right? And, certainly there's some spaces to go ahead and make corrections and make changes. I'm not just saying we just kind of let this kind of whatever happens, right? There's some subtle things that teachers do. But a lot of times the teachers just have to kind of trust the curriculum materials, right? And also trust the science, trust the evidence. Nature is our best teacher, right? It's going to come out. It's going to be fine, right? And we can make some changes of stuff as we go along within the assessments and whatnot. But at the end of the instruction, we're always like at the end of the lesson, hey, what are we wondering about now? What connect, asking like, let's add that to our wonder wall. Let's add that to our connection chart. Like and so we're just always just trying to feed those sorts of things. But again, that really just go ahead and just ramp up that level of engagement because, again, the people are seeing themselves in the science. And I think a lot of times we hear, within these high quality instructional materials, this idea of phenomena fatigue, right? Where it's just like, oh, we've been on this, whatever it happens to be, this for so long, trying to make sense of this sorts of thing, right? But I really think that the way out of that phenomena fatigue is the relevant pieces. Like, how is this making you think of things relating to your lives? That's really the piece. And again, I think that's the work that we really just encourage our teachers to really just try and think about, and embedding those in specific places, putting a little post-it note, right, that you carry around with you saying like, hey, ask them what this is making them think of, right? So we just kind of remember that we continue to do that as we're doing the science.
I also think that Phenomena Fatigue would be a great band name in the 90s, like an emo band. I think that'd be great. Phenomena Fatigue.
Hey, thanks for coming out.
Thank you, Cleveland. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges of supporting kids as they learn, as they go into science. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so really what it becomes, again, the teacher is a co-learner, like the smartest one in the room is the room, right? But the teacher is always working to kind of help support this growth mindset, right, in children, and really kind of helping understand that as we're doing this work, our thinking is always changing. It's always evolving, right? And really that's truly the work of science, because science, when you're developing models are never perfect. They can't be perfect or they'd be the real thing, right? And models always lead to new questions and new wonderings. And so at the same time, we're really leveraging the noticing, wondering, connections routines as ways to go ahead and help students see themselves in science and make those connections. We're also really leveraging those sorts of things to help students understand that the process of science is really about making the best sense you can with evidence, right? And saying like, yeah, still more to know. We can dig more into this, but this is working good enough for us right now, right? We're helping, them move away from like, well, this is not truth. Well, no, science is less concerned about quote unquote truth or proving sorts of things, but like doing the best enough job that we can to make sense of something and saying like, yeah, here's the evidence we have to support this, and this is the best we know for right now. And that's okay. And really, this idea of practice makes progress. This is a mantra that I've really started to go on, and I think is really important for our future teachers. That teaching is not about perfection; it's about progress, right? Uh,
Mm.
in that practice makes progress, not only the rehearsals you do, the preparation work you do, right? And you want to carry that ethos with your children as well, and recognizing, like, yeah, whoa, we didn't get that quite right. And that's okay, right? Because here are the things we learned out of that. And those sorts of things really kind of, I think, lower the temperature for children, lower the temperature for teachers, right? And it just makes for a beautiful, messy environment where we just do the best we can to make sense of our world.
I feel that this comes up a lot, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but I see the direct correlation between art and science all the
Yes.
time with this because when I've taught a lot of younger kids cartooning classes and things like that,
Yes.
and kids think when they see like Mickey Mouse that it's drawn perfectly the first time. So they try to draw the outline of Mickey Mouse, and the first thing I do is to teach them a sketchbook is nothing but mistakes. The whole thing is nothing but mistakes, and then you eventually get better, and
Hmm.
then the next time you do it, you're even better than that. So there is no
Hmm.
perfection, and I love that. I think that that's so important to teach kids that failure is not failure; it's part of the process. And I think that science does that almost better than anything else for most kids.
It's essential. Like, or we just wouldn't understand our world. Like, that is just essential.
You touched a little bit on the world of AI, and it's not something we've talked a lot
Hmm.
about because I think everyone is still trying
Yeah.
to figure it out. But let's talk a little bit about what skills you think that kids will need in a world full of AI, like the positives and the negatives, because it's impacting my life already. I'm a voice actor and I'm a
Yeah.
video creator and I'm an illustrator.
Yeah.
All those things are being heavily impacted by AI in a scary kind of way. So, what do you think? I'd like to get you to weigh in on the importance of what kind of skills kids need, of the pros and the cons of it.
Let me talk about, I think, some of the things that AI affords us, and thinking about ways that we're thinking about really leveraging them within teacher education settings. One of the things that I think is interesting about AI is AI can help generate anticipated responses. So, for example, if you give it a phenomena, right, and you kind of describe the phenomena, or even give it a link to the phenomena, right, or even show it a video of the phenomena and say, like, hey, what are some things that a 6-year-old, 6-year-old or 8-year-old might notice, wonder, and connect about? And it'll generate that work for you. And what the teacher's role then becomes in that space is becomes kind of like truthing it out, right? Saying, like, okay, is this something a child might say or not might say? And then you add that to your work, getting into your brain. And so kind of kickstarts. I think it has the potential. We haven't tested this idea, in any kind of formal sort of way, but we've kind of seen, like, our students actually kind of do this on their own. Like, our future teachers do this work on their own. And so we've kind of like started, like, oh, maybe we should try this too, right? Maybe it's got some power in doing that, and maybe, yeah, let's try it and see what can kind of start to jumpstart that, the pedagogical content knowledge, right? Which is really just thinking about anticipated responses for specific instructional types of standards or whatnot. And so I think it's got some power there. I'll just switch and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that I see with AI. And I think AI really starts to kind of buck up against um, some of the conceptions of what it means to be a science teacher, right? And I also do secondary science preparation work as well. And so I prepare middle school and high school science teachers as well and do professional development work on that, right? And we think about, some even the stand and deliver models, right, that are out there. And boy, I don't know, man. I think AI can do a pretty reasonable job like, a student, we're going to feed in some homework prompts, right, into that. AI does a pretty amazing job of pulling together, even with sources sometimes, right? If you ask it to provide sources, which I think you should always do
Yeah.
with your AI, like, hey,
I
what's
think
your,
that's
like,
number one right there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like, where are you pulling this from?
Yeah.
What are your sources? And because sometimes, like, oh, actually, I don't have any sources for that, so I think I misspoke. Like, yeah, you sure did. And so, I think that for those folks, like, it's like, well, we're going to shut down students' ability to use that. Well, I think that's a great idea in the classroom space for sure, right? And, this kind of moving away from even using cell phones and with all the work, we don't need cell phones in schools, in my opinion. And I think a lot of folks' opinion too, for kind of the dangers related to social media, right, and attention distraction, right? And so, but you can't necessarily control it outside of your space. And if you're assigning homework in that, right, like you're going to get a lot of AI type responses. We certainly see some AI type responses, like to the prompts, right? And it does it that we would ask for homework. And so we're thinking about our homework differently as well in that space, asking students to make noticing, wondering connections type experiences to things that they're reading themselves, some of the literature that works in that space. And so like it's again, like these AI models are flawed, right? They're just based on, not everybody's voices in these things, because they're just really kind of just, programmed based on what's been in, the dominant Western, type of experience, that it's really drawing from the internet work. And so, it can hallucinate and be misleading. However, that being said, right, man, I just like sometimes you look at it and go like, wow, that's pretty powerful. Like that's doing some really interesting things, right? And so talking about the conception of what is your role as a teacher then in that space, as a secondary science teacher, a middle school science teacher, even an elementary science teacher, it's really not the content delivery. It's really not the disciplinary core ideas. And if you ask it to even develop a model to explain a phenomena, right, a very complex phenomena, it'll do a pretty reasonable job of doing that too, even generating some of the artwork related to that, right? Drawing some input, output arrows, and those sorts of things. And so, like it's becoming, a pretty powerful tool. So, what does that look like? What does the teacher's role then become in that space? Can AI leverage, or could you work with AI to really ask it to delve into students' prior knowledge and life experiences? Yeah, you could. Yeah, you could do that. I could see AI, having programming in AI to ask students, like showing them a phenomenon, having them engage with noticing, wondering connections, right, within that space. But here's where I think that you just can't replicate, the work that I think a lot of teachers are concerned about, right? Which is where, like, AI becomes the replacement, for teaching science, right? It becomes the tool in that space. Here's where I really get concerned about this. It is in the collective sense making work, right? Because when we pull out, you pull out the machines, you pull out the AI, like how do you replicate in such a way that this idea of the smartest person in the room is the room? How do you do the work of making sense of the world together when it's just you and an AI chatbot, right? I think that it it just, I can't see a way in which it works. And I think that there's a really grave danger to our small d democracy, um, that that science, I think, plays a particularly powerful role, is where, again, if we have this ethos of like, we're going to figure out the science together, the smartest one in the room is the room, how are we preparing our students, our children, our kindergartners to listen to each other, listen to each other for understanding, and start to practice these things, saying like, hey, I hear you saying blank. Can you say more about what you mean by blank? I heard you say this. I respectfully disagree with you because of blank, right? And very small children can do this. Kindergartners, you can work with them to do this. First graders, certainly you can do this. These sorts of kind of things that I think become so critically important for our world, for our society, right? For our small d democracy, where we have these experiences where students don't realize, right, that they're engaged in this really important work that, as future elders are going to have to do, right, which is listen for understanding, listen with empathy, agree or disagree without being disagreeable, right? So the classrooms, John Dewey, right, the classrooms, right, kind of today are really the our, our local, our city, our federal, our state, our world politics, it is the work that happens within households. Like, it just becomes such an amazing, special place that science really gets to play this role in really helping prepare students to really just do the human work, right? Of really being with each other and in ways, in face-to-face types of settings, or in online, settings perhaps too, right? But really, it is that fundamental work that I think that science does, that high quality instructional materials can help promote that. I don't see a way that AI can do that just yet.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest issue with it, is that unfortunately people take it as truth if they see it on a screen. And we need to be more questioning. I mean, just right at the core of what you're talking about, noticing, wondering, connections.
Yeah.
Look at the information, but then verify it and question it and talk about it, because too many people just, oh, that's a beautiful image of a guy holding a puppy. No, it's not. Right. It's completely fake. So yeah, the critical thinking skills, to me, as I've been doing this more and more, super important moving forward, more so than ever, I think. Yeah. Well, that was a fun dystopian way to end the podcast, but Professor Joel, Donna, this has been great. Really, really interesting stuff. I can't thank you enough for being here.
Oh, it has been my absolute pleasure. It's such a joy. I really appreciate you for making space for me to think about these things. These are things that, I'm oftentimes more facilitative in my work, and asking students what they think and how they might handle this. And so we don't oftentimes get an opportunity to go ahead and just kind of speak from the heart about what we do and why we do it, right? And so I'm incredibly grateful for the space that you provide for this.
It's Time for Science is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lippman and Tom Racine, and is sponsored by School Specialty and FOSS, the Full Option Science System, at the Lawrence Hall of Science, UC Berkeley. Be sure to check out FOSS on Facebook and Instagram.